Hello, I'll be doing my video blog this week on William Ashley Sunday, better known as Billy Sunday. He was a professional baseball player who then turned preacher/evangelist. He was not specifically a businessman in regards to the rise in industrialization or the rise of big business in the 1920s, but he was, however, an entrepreneur. He was able to spread ideas and the gospel across different areas of the country and different cities and states. So Billy Sunday wasn't necessarily the typical industrial entrepreneur, but he was an entrepreneurial evangelist, and therefore he had a foot in both worlds. And in this process, he was able to build upon the foundation from other revivalists like George Whitefield or Charles Finney or D.L. Moody. And after him, he laid the foundation or left a legacy for people like Aimee Semple McPherson or Billy Graham. I think it's important to give some context as to who Billy Sunday was before he joined the ministry. He was a professional baseball player in the late 1800s and the 1880s. He played for the Chicago White Stockings, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, and the Philadelphia Phillies. On these professional teams, he served as their business managers. He helped balance books and travel expenses. His popularity with the fans and teammates and also his business acumen were all things that would help him as he transitioned into a revivalist. He converted to Christianity and eventually left professional baseball in order to pursue the ministry. In fact, Robert Martin, in his book Hero of the Heartland, calls it entrepreneurial evangelism. He started small. He had a revival circuit that he labeled himself the Kerosene Circuit. It was in Iowa, in the Midwest. He would speak in small churches or small tents. These things had no electricity. Half of his early meetings took place in towns with less than 2,500 people. He would get his hands dirty. He helped build the tents for the revival. He empathized with their hopes and fears. He was able to, as one author said, talk farming with the farmers and talk business with the businessmen. He was a man of the people. This small beginning reminded me of our Building Communities chapter. In a lot of these places, the social function of the town, took place at the church or at the school. Since they were in rural areas, as were his revivals, they were in need of a church or a spiritual experience. For Sunday, these small beginnings really helped him develop. He prepared himself for bigger and better things while still accomplishing his spiritual calling. By 1907, the average town size for one of his revivals was 10,000 people. By 1908, 20,000. In the 1910s, preached to millions of people. He moved from this small-scale local revival to a national stage, speaking in big cities like Boston, Philadelphia, Kansas City. The specifics are different, but it brought me back to the Midwestern industrialization article that we read this week, how manufacturing in the Midwest built up its repertoire until it could compete on a national level. The same thing was true with Sunday in his ministry. When it was time, he was able to compete, so to speak, on a national stage. So it wasn't all business. He was a conservative. He preached against the evils of alcohol. He labeled himself a sin hater. There was a spiritual element to all of this, but he had to pay attention to, for instance, market conditions. There was no established church in the United States, so there were competing voices. There were competing churches. He was, in a sense, fighting for market share. This would influence his style of preaching. It would influence the way he advertised his meetings. He was a forceful preacher. He used colorful language. He utilized slang to, quote, reach the common man. He was theatrical. He would stand on the pulpit. He would slide across stage. He knew he had to produce in order to keep people coming out. He started to pay attention to attendance numbers and the number of conversions. He built a team led by his wife to run the revivals. He began to charge a fee. He paid musicians to be on his staff. By the time it was all said and done, he had a full-time staff of over 10 workers. Sunday advertised these revivals. Jeremy Young, in his article, Transformation in the Tabernacle, talks about how people would go to their neighbors and give testimony. Sometimes the local press would pick it up. By 1907, the national press began to pick it up as his reputation and popularity grew. They would print texts of his sermons in the front page. They would post offering numbers, offering totals, and attendance numbers. Sunday, quote, saw no reason the techniques of America's material progress shouldn't be used for spiritual growth. The early stages of his ministry, His offerings per revival ranged anywhere from $33 to around $1,500. Between 1902 and 1905, $2,000 per revival. In 1906, $4,000 per revival, and by the 1920s, he was a millionaire. He believed that God blessed those who did God's will. Scholars note that his masterful preaching led many to commit their lives to Jesus. His popularity grew and brought him into elite company. He met with John D. Rockefeller. He met with Theodore Roosevelt. Some conservative Christians and clergy didn't like his antics, called him materialistic, but he was quoted as saying there is something inherent in the human mind that causes people to listen when a man is preaching the gospel. Billy Sunday was a minister. He had an appealing product. He used extensive advertising. He created a sophisticated organization. He was an entrepreneurial evangelist.